really, for a young man called Sean, just so he knows. I don't know if he'll understand this, but I'm going to do this in 15-minute slots. Okay. One of the really important things about autism is to make things predictable. So I'm going to make it predictable by saying every 15 minutes I'm going to do a Bible verse. So you know I'm going on to the next bit. So there you go. That's good, predictable stuff for autism. So, being asked to talk about autism, I'm going to call it the joy of autism, because I actually think autism, my son Jono is 25, and although we've been through quite a journey with him, which I'll tell you about, I wouldn't ever say he suffers from autism. I really think that in many ways Jono enjoys being autistic, so I'm going to call it the joy of autism. So there you go. Right, and I'm going to start with a verse from 1 Samuel, which, unbelievably, which is true, is on the wall. Look at that, that is so cool. I walked in and I thought, oh, right, okay, so this is definitely the Lord. Right, so this is 1 Samuel 16, you know the story. Samuel's going to anoint the next king. He's going to this family. It's full of like really, really big lads. He thinks, oh, it's going to be one of them. And God keeps saying, no, it's not them, it's not them. And then they end up with the tiny little shepherd's boy who no one even thought to invite to the big Samuel meeting. But actually, this is what God says. So he says to Samuel, because Samuel keeps saying, but surely you're going to want this lad. And the Lord keeps saying no. The Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And I think that's a really key thing to say to start with about autism, is that people really judge autism by what they see. They often see, for want of a better word, people behaving strangely, or saying things that are strange, and they kind of like judge autism on that. They don't understand what's going on underneath, and they certainly don't see people's hearts. And can I say that I am privileged to know a lot of autistic people. We have a little autistic community in Newham, growing all the time, and that's because of 3 people, and they're not here. So you might one of these days get to meet Jono. You're very unlikely to meet Karis, because she'll fly in. She flies in to see her grandma and flies out again. And if you know anything about 28-year-olds, you don't really have a lot of say in what they do. So you might get to meet Imogen. You're more likely to meet Imogen. So there's basically 3 of them. There's Jono. He's my 25-year-old younger, one with complex autism. And then I've got 2 others, which is my daughter Karis, who's 28, and she was actually only diagnosed with autism when she was 21. So there's a bit of story to that. And then her best friend, Imogen, who is also 28, and she was diagnosed with autism when she was 16. Now, Karis and Imogen are incredibly important in this story, because Karis and Imogen have both got what's called, it used to be called Asperger's syndrome. It's now called autism with low support needs. In other words, people who are autistic, but they've got normal to above average intelligence. And what they've helped me do, because they're quite, how can I put this? How would you describe them, Mum? Feisty? I mean, you know, they have an opinion about everything. I mean, put it this way, Imogen has a badge that she wears on her coat that says, I'm autistic, what are you going to do about it? Question mark. She's quite assertive about her autism as Imogen. So essentially, they've really helped me understand a lot of things that Jono, although I lived with Jono all his life, wasn't able to tell me, because Jono is non-verbal, he doesn't really use words. No, that's not true. He does say no, mum, dad, and go away. So there you go. But that's not really a big repertoire to tell me what's going on in his head. Whereas Karis and Imogen can tell me lots of stuff, and they have, and they've been incredibly helpful. And in fact, myself and Imogen are now training people with autism in Newham. We're just in the middle of training GP surgeries about understanding autism and learning disabilities, and on Thursday, when I go back to London, we're going to be training our first batch of social workers, which is so cool. So happy about that. So we're going to be training social workers about autism. So that's really cool. And she's really helped a lot in terms of putting this the training together. Now I'm not doing the training, I'm just going to pick a few bits out, but you did have a PowerPoint, but that's not a bad thing that we haven't, because I'll probably go off piece anyway. So, however, as I said to my mum, I do like a bit of interaction. I'm not the world's greatest just talking to you, so I'm going to start with a bit of interaction and just hope. Now, here's the thing, I don't need you to do very much, I just need you to vote, okay? I'm going to say something, and you've got to decide whether you think it's true or false. That's it, okay? Dead easy. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. I'm going to just say, so, autism is an illness. True or false? So, vote for true or false. False. Lots of falses over here. False.
True.
Okay, well, in fact, you're right. It's not an illness. Okay, it is a medical condition. So in that sense, it's in like all the diagnostic things, but it's not something you can get a treatment for. There's no cure for it. You're born with it, you die with it. You have it all your life, and it's what's called a lifelong condition. Okay, right. Next one. Autistic people are usually highly intelligent. True or false? True. There's got a couple of falses over here and mostly trues. Well, actually, it's false. I'll just get my facts. The great thing is that I run my one of the other people that runs the training with is a learning disability nurse, and she's really good on getting the stats sorted out. 60% of autistic people also have a learning disability. But the people that we know about that are on telly or whatever tend to be the 30 to 40% who don't have a learning disability. So those are the ones that are famous that end up working at GCHQ and do all these like things. But most people who've got autism have a learning disability. So Karis and Imogen's cohort, although very, very vocal, is smaller than the majority of the people that got autism in the UK. This isn't the facts, it's not on the facts, but do you know how many, if you've got 100 kids now, how many of them will get diagnosed with autism? You what?
70.
7.
Everybody's on the spectrum, aren't
You pardon?
they? Isn't everybody on the autistic
No.
spectrum?
No, you're not. I'll come to that in a minute. That's also a myth. There you go, Jan. There you go. Very good. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of theories. The National Autistic Society says that 1 in 100 young children will be diagnosed with autism. America, and they're always a bit ahead of us in terms of research, are saying it's 1 in 68 children are going to be autistic, which is higher, actually. Anyway, it's quite high. Okay. True or false? Autism doesn't have one specific cause. True or false? False. So that means that autism does just have one specific cause. What's the cause?
True.
Yeah. Okay, I'm a bit confused there because I started having a conversation with Sheila, which took me off piece a bit. Sheila's one of my Sunday school teachers. I'm going through, like, I've got uncles and aunts here, I've got, you name it, they're all here. Anyway, so autism doesn't have one specific cause. It's a genetically linked condition, which means that it runs in families. But it doesn't mean just because I have kids, I've got 2 autistic kids, but that doesn't follow that, you know, it's going to be passed on to the next generation. It's not as definitive as that. It's very difficult to understand. There seems to be a combination of genetic factors and environmental factors. However, let me just throw out a few things. It's not caused by parents being... There used to be a theory in the 1960s that autism was caused by refrigerator parents. In other words, parents who are really detached. That's not true. It's not caused by the MMR. That's been completely disproved. And that's a bit of an issue because quite a lot of people didn't get their kids vaccinated for COVID because they were worried about vaccinations, and actually there is no link between autism and the MMR. Let's just get that out there because it's causing a few problems now. Right. Okay. So there's your facts and myths. The key thing to say about autism is that it's a medical condition, and there's been a huge amount of theories about what causes it, because it's been a bit of a mystery. That's the first thing to say. And the other thing about it is that there seems to have been this dramatic increase in the amount of people that have got autism from when, let's be honest, from when me and Sharon were kids. Okay? And that's because the diagnosis criterion for autism has changed massively. So and this is true even of my kid's lifetime, right? So when Jono was 25, when he was 3, he was diagnosed with autism. Now his autism is quite severe and complex, and he's got severe learning disabilities, and really, when he was 3, that was pretty much the only autism that was being diagnosed. The really, really, almost like very obvious, severe kind of autism. It was only in 1994, which was the year that Caris was actually born, that there were people in the Maudsley Hospital in London that started to say, hang on a minute, there are other people around who are, and there's a spectrum of people who've got autism, and there's people who've got normal intelligence who've got autism, and started to notice a whole group of people that had just been missed. And that group is, Caris's group, the people with normal to high, they're called high functioning autistic now. And that opened the door to lots and lots of other people getting diagnosed, which wasn't the case. That's why it feels like there's a massive increase in autism. It's not, it's just because the diagnosis criteria changed. Let's say that. The other thing is boys and girls. So when Jono was little, when he was 3, there was hardly any girls. I mean, hardly any at all, actually. It was like really rare to find an autistic girl. And again, it's because they didn't understand that girls are massively good at masking. Unless they've got very, very severe autism, they're amazingly good at kind of masking it. So their autism wasn't being picked up, which is why Imogen and Caris both got diagnosed late. Very, very often, girls and women back in the day, it's changed a bit now. I'm sorry to say this, but when my mum told me that there's a few girls at the church who've got autism, I was so happy. I'm sorry, I'm probably the only person who will say that, and that's because it means that girls are getting diagnosed, and they're not having to go through primary school and school without that kind of help and support, because it's really important to get a diagnosis early. And Imogen and Caris will say to you, both of them will say, if only we'd had a diagnosis early, it would have made such a difference. So for me to hear that actually schools are getting better at picking it up is music to my ears, to be honest. However, most girls, and certainly if you're a woman, you only get diagnosis for 2 reasons. One is because you have some sort of mental health crisis, which involves you ending up in the kind of hospital setting, and people look at your conditions a bit and start to think, oh, maybe you've got autism. Or the classic way that people get diagnosed is when they have a kid. So they have a kid, their kid gets diagnosed with autism, and then they think, oh, let's think about the mother, because the mother is very similar to the kid. And that's often how older women are getting diagnosed. But actually, what they're discovering is that they used to think that it was more prevalent in boys, but what they now think is actually it's just as prevalent in men and women, it's just that the women weren't getting diagnosed. There you go. So that's that bit. Right, now, just checking, I'm all right. I'm looking at the time, I'm all right. Having your mother in the audience, not sure if that's a good thing. Discuss. Having your mother in the audience, discuss at a later date. Anyway, right, so I'm going to try and do a whistle-stop tour now of autism, and in order for it to help, you're going to have to keep up with me, and to do that, I'm going to ask you questions, because that'll keep you awake. Otherwise, how are you going to stay awake? Yes. And I'm going to PowerPoint or pictures, so it's the only way we're going to do this, right? So, National Autistic Society says that there are 6 ways that autism generally affects people, okay? And the first one is called social communication, and it's actually quite hard to understand because social communication is basically the way that we, as a human, understand other humans. Okay? How do we? Because we're born from a very early age understanding humans. Right? Who's got? I know this. There's loads of you. Who's got a grandchild? Right? Who's got a grandchild? Who's a baby? Little baby. Okay, at the moment, you've got any, there's no grandchildren with babies at the moment?
It's a great grandma.
Okay, well we need I need a baby, I need a resident baby, because this is only going to work with a baby. So when you pick a baby up, if you can remember your grandchildren from when they were babies, you pick the baby up, they're about 2 months old, they've just started smiling, okay? And they look at you in the eye, they give you lovely eye contact, and you go, because this is what people do when they pick a baby up, they go, oogie, 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 yeah? And then your baby goes, oogie, oogie back. And then you go, oogie, 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 and the baby goes, oogie, oogie, oogie. Do you know what that is? Do you know what it's called in the trade? That's just social, well, it's fun, but it's also social interaction. A child gives you eye contact, they get an absolute surge of serotonin, hormones flooding through their body. They are neurologically set up to communicate with you and give you loads of interaction. And basically, that's what they do, and that's how they learn that social interaction with other humans is fun and great and good. That's how they do it. Okay. If you're autistic and you're born with an autistic brain, that's the thing to remember, is that the autistic, I'll come into the autistic brain in a minute, but basically people with autism are born with differently wired brains. Does anyone know anything about neurology? No, it's not really a kind of specialist subject in Ladies Forum, as far as I know. Okay. However, I've become really into neurology, partly because I've got 2 autistic kids, but partly because my husband's had strokes, so I've become fascinated with neurology. In the case of autism, they have now been able to pinpoint what they think is the reason for autism, and that is because, if you've ever had a brain scan, has anyone ever had a brain scan?
No.
Somebody's nodding, which is great. Okay, right.
Confounded.
Okay, can't do anything about that. Right, so when they do a brain scan, normally you've got the parts of the brain, and then you've got all the kind of white matter and the grey matter in a brain, right? And in every brain, it's traditionally wired in the same way. With autism, it's kind of all over the place. So some autistic people have less wiring, and some autistic people have too much wiring. They have too much of the white and the grey matter. And what that means is that either they don't have enough information in certain parts of their brain, and in some cases they have far too much information, and it causes no end of issue. Okay, but they're not wired up to do social interaction. That's the key thing, and that makes a massive difference. So when you do the normal baby oogie googie stuff, mainstream babies get this surge of serotonin. When you do oogie googie to a baby who will later be diagnosed as autistic, what happens is that the kid doesn't do anything for them at all. I remember really clearly when Johnny was little, when he was a baby, he wasn't giving me anything. I would try and give him eye contact, do the oogie googie, but I realised quite early on that he was much more interested in washing machines. Like, he was much more excited by watching a washing machine than he was in talking and interacting with me. That was the truth of it. He wasn't wired up to want to do social interaction. Problem is, what happens is that autistic babies then miss out on all the important developmental stuff that enables us to understand humans. Right, quick quiz. Sorry. Right, this is you. So, how much of social interaction is non-verbal? In other words, how much of the way that you understand everybody in this room today do you do non-verbally, not through words, but just through non-verbal? Nothing. Okay? That's one answer, nothing. Anyone else got an answer? So we've got nothing and the majority. Anything in between? Bit of an auction here. Okay.
By their appearance, by whether they smile.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, not yet. That's exactly right. Non-verbal cues are things like smiling, frowning. My mother, before I came out today, she said, "Stop frowning at me, Alison." Well, that's a really good. I was frowning because I didn't understand what she was saying, but you know, hey. But just want to back myself up there. But the thing is that we do all this facial expression, which is non-verbal. We just automatically understand. We read it automatically. We do it like body language, tone of voice, loads and loads of things that are non-verbal. And I have to say, Kelly, you're dead on. 94% of the information that we get in terms of understanding humans is non-verbal. 94%. So there is your huge problem if you're autistic, because if you start with the basics of social interaction and it builds, because then you can predict how people are going to respond, you can predict what's going to happen to those humans, you're predicting like what's going to happen in this meeting today, you can predict what's going to happen next. All of these things that you get just from non-verbal cues, you get all of that from non-verbal cues. And autistic people don't have any of that information. So I'm not going to pick on Sean, but Sean doesn't understand what's going on here. Doesn't really understand. He's here because his mum and his grandma are probably being quite nice to him, and he's got his like tablet thing in front of him, but he's absolutely not one clue. He's only been here because he's actually been quite kind to his mum, really, truthfully. And he doesn't have a clue. And Jono goes to church because he has a table and he gets stickers, not because he understands what church is. He has no idea what church is. Doesn't understand it at all. Because all the stuff, all the information that is built up from when you're 6 weeks old to when you're 25, he's had none of that information. And we just take that information for granted every day, and we get really cross if people don't read us, don't we? We're really cross if people don't notice that we're not doing very well. Imagine if, you know, okay, so I'll give you a really good example. So, yeah, just like, okay, if you came into church and you were crying, you'd be a bit upset if people didn't notice, wouldn't you? So, it's very, very likely that Jono is going to go up to, imagine Janice was crying, she probably wouldn't be crying in church, but imagine she was, right? And she was crying. So Jono would probably just go up to her and go, sorry Janice, I want to touch you. He'd touch you like that. And it wouldn't be because he was like, because she was sad, he'd just be interested in the fact that you had water coming out your eyes. He wouldn't get it. He wouldn't understand what that was. He would just think, oh, it's very interesting, Janice has got water coming out of her eyes. Wouldn't have a clue what it meant. So do you see what I mean? There's a whole, we understand the world through social interaction, and they don't know any of it. So that's a massive bit of autism. Now, if you're like Karis and Imogen and you've got normal to above intelligence, you can learn stuff. So Karis and Imogen have learned how to read faces. And to varying degrees, they're quite good at it. But if you're someone like Jono, you're never going to learn that, ever, because he's got severe learning disabilities and he's never going to be able to learn it. So can you see, that's a massive problem for people who are autistic. That's just the first one, but I thought I'd labour that because it's really important and people don't understand it that well. Next one is social communication. That means it's dead easy. It's like using words and understanding what's said to you. So, it's dead easy with John because he doesn't have many words, but some people have words, but they don't understand what's being said to them. So essentially what happens is that people, because they hear an autistic person speak, they assume that they understand what's being said to them, and they don't. And that happens all the time. My daughter, and also they don't understand when, like the cues in conversation, when you can say things. Autistic people are often known to be either often socially awkward because, again, they don't know the rules, that's to do with social interaction, or because they don't know how to be in a conversation. So the way that they would do conversation is to just take over a conversation and talk about their particular subject, which could be East Anglian Railways or whatever, because they don't really understand the to and fro of a conversation. They don't get that. Also, they do other things, like they can do this thing called echolalia, which is when they can talk and appear to really be speaking, but actually not have a clue about what they've just said. So, a couple of examples of this, which are quite fun, because as you say, I've got this very rich and diverse autistic community. We have this lovely lad who's actually now going to uni. He's an autistic young man, and when he was about 8 or 9, my husband's mum was dying of terminal cancer. And so my husband was going off to Wales to visit her and coming back, and he was doing this quite often. So this lovely lad used to come up to Si when he came back, and he would say to him, Has your mum died yet? Every single time he saw him, because he was just trying to ascertain, the facts. He didn't think he was being rude. We actually thought it was really funny, but other people would be really upset by it. But he was just trying to understand the facts, trying to understand it. Another one, I'm doing this one because I road tested these on my mother, and this one made her laugh, so I thought I'd go with this one. So my Imogen is my daughter's best friend, but her mum is one of my best friends, right? So when I listen to the story, it really makes me laugh because it just makes me think of Liz. So Imogen is about 9 or 10, and her mum's a teacher, very, very hard-working teacher. Mum comes home from work, and Imogen, as soon as she gets through the door, needs to tell her mum that she is hungry. So she stands by the fridge and she goes, I'm really hungry, Mum, can I have some food? Have you got any food, Mum? Have you got... No, Liz has had a terrible day, right? And so, but Imogen doesn't get any of her mum's social cues at all, none of them. She's just hungry, so she just keeps standing by the fridge. So at one stage, her mum goes upstairs because she's really upset. So Imogen, I'm not kidding, stands outside the bathroom going, Mum, I'm still really hungry, is there any food? When are you going to do food? So eventually, Liz comes down, gives her some food, and then gets really upset with her and says, I'm really, really upset with, the way you've been with me. And she said, and Imogen just looks really confused. And then Liz says, so say sorry. So she says, sorry. And then she pauses. And then she said, and can I have some food now, please? And then Liz said, what are you saying sorry for? And she said, I don't know. Can I have some food now, please? Now Imogen is doing an English Lit degree and can talk for Britain, but that just gives you an illustration of how someone has no understanding of the social context, doesn't understand the cues, doesn't get any of that, but just wants feeding and needs to make sure that her mother knows that. And I can just imagine Liz in the bathroom. Anyway, so that's social communication. Then we've got repetitive behaviours and kind of ritual behaviours. So generally, with someone who's got more complex autism, you get more repetitive behaviours. Now, I'm pleased to see we've got someone here who does the same movement that John's does, because it makes it so much easier to describe it. So John's has a variety of... And Jono is a big lad. He's very big. He's over 6 foot, towers over my mother. Terrifying to see them around. If you know my mother's mobility, it's terrifying because he just walks through people, and he's got lots of repetitive movements. One of his favourites is this one. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, Kelly? This one? So this is this and this one. Got this one. If he's really, really happy, he does this one and this one, and he goes Jewy, 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 because that's his happy noise. What these repetitive behaviours are is a way of him managing all the information that he's getting. I'll do that in a minute. But basically, he develops repetitive behaviours to help him cope with a world that's actually very, very scary. Most of the time, he's in a state of anxiety because he doesn't understand what's going on around him. So he does these movements because they comfort him, actually. That's all he does them for. It's just as simple as that. He just does them because they make him feel comfortable. And Karis and Imogen will tell you that they do the same thing, except in their case, it's to do with bags. When Karis goes out, I am not kidding, it takes that child, well, she's not a child, an hour and a half to leave the house, because she has to pack her rucksack to the absolute, because you never know. You might need 3 books, even if you're going to work. You might need 2 lunches just in case the other one doesn't work. You might need 3 drinks, and you need your lip balm. And the other day I caught her with sun lotion. I said, Karis, it's October. And she said, well, you don't know, it might be hot. So just because somebody doesn't do this doesn't mean that they haven't got their own rituals. And again, it's the same thing. She is trying to find predictability in a world that for most of the time just makes her feel quite stressed and anxious. So that's rituals and predictable behaviour. Then we've got sensory processing. Now, all the research is basically saying that sensory processing differences is probably the root cause of most of the autistic stuff that you see. So most of the behaviour that you see, because literally autistic brains they're built without filters. We have filters in our brains. You're born with them, you don't know you've got them. They act as brake pads so that you don't hear all the noises in this room. So, in this room currently, there's me talking. There's this blowy thing, whatever that is, that noise, the heater. There are people making slight tiny noises, you know, because basically they're fidgeting, they're getting a bit bored and they're wondering where the cake is, okay? So there's quite a few of them. Okay, there's people scratching their ears and people, you know, scratching their nose. Now, if you're mainstream, your brain has got loads of filters, so you just filter out all those background noises. If you're autistic, you can't filter anything. So, currently, Sean may be hearing the heater, he's going to be hearing you fiddling, he's going to be hearing the dog, probably, at the back, even though the dog's very calm. You can see the dog's very calm, but even the dog, he'll just be picking up all of these subtle differences in sound, and he'll hear them really loud. Not like we do, he'll hear them loud. Also, some autistic people have the same issue with sight, so that the fluorescent lights are just way too bright for them. Some have problems with touch and smell. So Jono's got a really pronounced sense of smell, much more pronounced than the average population, so he can't filter out smells. It's quite good because he can spot a curry about a mile away, but it's not good in other ways, you know, because he finds hospitals really difficult to deal with because of the smell. So all those things that we have that are filters, they're not born with. Okay, they can like find ways of adaptation. So classically, some autistic people have ear defenders, some have lots of sensory toys. iPads, are they not a boon, Kelly? Oh my goodness. Oh, I mean, honestly, the best thing my mother ever did was buy Jono that iPad. Oh my goodness. It's just, I don't know what we do without it, because it's got YouTube on and loads of stuff that he likes to do, and he can communicate with it. Ugh. So there's all sorts of ways that really help, but essentially they have a brain that doesn't have those things. Okay, now here's the problem. The problem basically is that in church, you know where I'm going here, churches are full of noise, smell. It's people congregating together in social groups where you've got someone who doesn't understand interaction. Okay, and it's just really tricky. So what do you do? So I've gone over my bit for that. Oh, the other things to say about autism, the other 2 things that I haven't mentioned. One is anxiety. Let's just do a stat, finish this section off. What is the stat for the general autistic population in terms of anxiety? Really high. So at least 40% of the autistic population will have some sort of diagnosed anxiety condition throughout their life. Most people, it's higher than that. We're talking about diagnosable conditions, compared to 10% of the adult population, so it's really high. Okay, and the other final one that I love is highly focused interest in hobbies. So they have hobbies that they're hyper-focused on their hobbies or their interests. And that can range from East Anglian Railways to art to, they can be really good at maths and end up as coders. I love the fact that when Imogen was tiny, little, she used to write these tiny little books, obsessed with tiny little books, and now she's doing an English Lit degree and she's a writer. I love that. So it's like hyper-focus, but it's become a proper, you know, job for her. And that often happens to people, they become experts in their field. Okay, right, so that's all your stuff about autism. So I'm going to now go on to my next bit, and this bit I'm going to read a little bit in the Bible in 1 Corinthians, and it's in verse 27. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. I like that because it's basically saying that, you know, kind of like God might be on the side of autistic people. Bit of a challenge there, but you know. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story to finish with, but before I do that, I just want to say something about autism and the church, and then I'll finish on my story, and then hopefully there'll be a bit of time for questions. Right, autism and church. Some autistic people actually find church quite easy, because if you run a church where everything is the same every week, it's quite predictable, and they quite like that. And I've noticed that if autistic people can cope with church, they can actually really be fantastic servants, because they're so flaming reliable. Again, I'm using Imogen. She's not here, bless her, but she doesn't mind. So Imogen goes to a local Anglican church and she's really into it. And I was talking to her vicar a few weeks ago, and she said, so it was complete chaos. And she said, but Imogen was sitting there. She's the only person that turned up for worship. She was the only one. She turned up 10 minutes early because she always turns up early for everything. If I ask Imogen, or, you know, there are certain people who are autistic, they'll always do it. They'll always do the stuff that you ask them to do. They're fantastic servants, actually, in the church, and really, really undervalued. All the time, I just feel as though they have a very deep and profound servant heart. They're also incredibly... Okay, it's one of the things I really like about autistic people. They find it incredibly hard to lie. So they can be breathtakingly rude, but they'll never lie, rarely lie. They are not manipulative. What you see is what you get. You always know where you are with an autistic person, and they have these incredible pure hearts. Plus, here's the thing, if they get into God, and a lot of them do, they're hyper-focused. Which means that, you know, most of us really struggle with things like prayer and Bible study. They don't. And I'll just finish this little section with a bit about Karis and Imogen. This is a true story. So years ago, they were talking to me about spending time with God. Has anyone ever done that thing? Have you ever been to a talk where people have talked about, you know, sitting in quiet before God and listening to God? Now, let's be truthful about this. If we do this, how long do we last without A, falling asleep? That's generally what happens to us now. B, checking our phones. C, making a shopping list for Morrison's. Okay, most of us end up doing stuff like that. Not autistic people. So I said to Karis, I taught them how to listen to God and just really, you know, just really stay in God's presence. The other day, I thought I'd check out. I said to Karis and Imogen, how long do you spend listening to God? And they looked at me and they said, really? I said, yeah, how long do you do it? So Karis said, oh, about 45 minutes a day normally. That's why it takes me so long to leave the house. Because I like to spend that amount of time with God before I go out. And I thought, blimey, if I spend 5 minutes like that, I think I'm doing really well. You know what I mean? And there's my daughter who, because they become hyper-focused on that thing, and if it's a good thing, it's amazingly good for them spiritually. So don't knock the hyper-focus. It can be amazing if it's put to good use. The problem is that a lot of autistic people really struggle with church because of all the things I've just described. So I'm going to do my story because it finishes with a thought about things you could do to welcome autistic people in. So this is my story. It starts 2015, what's that, 8 years ago? 8 years ago. 7 years ago. So if we go back to 2014, let's start with that. 2014, Caris came to me and she said, Mum, Johnny was still at school. She'd been working as a community arts person in community arts projects by then for about 3 or 4 years. And she said to me, Mum, I really think, I've been praying about this, and I really think we should start. I didn't like the word we. I would much prefer the word I, but she said we should start an art school for people with learning disabilities because there isn't one. So I said, okay, thinking, don't know anything about art, kind of hope someone else can do that, but good thought there, Caris, good thought. So, and she never, but because this is Caris, she just never let go of that. So just remember that, that's the first thing. So then we start thinking about the possibilities of what we could do, and then, but then it gets lost because I get cancer. While I'm having cancer, Jono is in his last year at school. And as you know, well, I'm looking at Kelly in particular, but most people, if they've got a kid with any kind of level of complex needs, there's this thing where you fall off the edge when they're 19, and we were aware that that was just about to happen to Jono. So we started to think about Jono, we started to think about the fact that he's really into his art, and we started to think about what Caris said about this art school for learning disabilities, so we thought maybe we could run something that was good for Johns but also helped others. So we talked to a local day centre, and they were really keen on it. We thought, well, we could get some direct payments from the local authority. Jono could have his own room, but then we could run some other activities for other people who've got autism and learning disabilities. So we thought, yeah, quid's in. Then the local authority closed all the day centres. So then there wasn't any day centres, and then I was really ill, so then we didn't really have the energy to do anything about that. And then Jono left school, and there was literally nothing for him at all in the local area, because no provider would take him because his needs were too challenging. And when I say that, Jono has got a lot of challenging behaviour, so he attacks people a lot. He did back in the day. It's another reason why I've never brought him to church, to be honest, because you never know what's going to happen. So sometimes it's not attacking people, sometimes it might be because you've got a very interesting button. I'm just looking to see if anyone's got any buttons. To be honest, Auntie Jean's polka dots would do, but something that's nicely brightly coloured, that that's tactile, and it's a bit worrying if a grown man goes up to an elderly lady and starts attacking their buttons. So there were a load of reasons why but basically there was nothing for him. No social provider would take him locally. We didn't want Jono to end up in a residential place, but we couldn't find anything at all. So to cut a very long story short, because I'm trying to buzz this story along, by this stage we've been in the borough a long time, and we've got all the people we know praying, and there was this very famous occasion where we decided we'd go and pray this is a true story, it's quite funny, eventually it will be a social comic drama because it is quite funny. So we decided that we'd go and pray at the place that actually resources families, the social care place, big council building. I'm sure there's one in St Helens as well. So we thought we'd go and pray there. And we didn't realise that the council had decided that the public couldn't go there anymore. So one of the people I pray with is an MP's wife. So there's this whole little scenario going on where the MP's wife might have been arrested, but she didn't. It's okay, it's okay. Nobody got hurt. Anyway, very, very long story short, 4 days later, I was sitting in a room at a meeting, a separate meeting, and I was sitting next to a woman who was in charge of all the people like Jono in the NHS for 4 boroughs, not just ours, but 4 other boroughs. And she turned to me and she said, how are you getting on? And I said, oh, it's going from bad to worse. Jono's behaviour's really escalating, he's attacking people, and we can't get anything for him, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to him. Because that's the other thing. If you do get to the point where your behaviour escalates, at the moment, even now, 5 years later, in the UK, you can end up in one of these awful private hospitals, and if you end up in a place like that, if you're Jono, you get restrained and medicated, that's it. And it takes 5 years for you to get out, and that's what we were really worried about. So this woman said to me, I said, well, it's funny you should say this, because today I'm just about to go and see the manager of the the social care team, and she looked at me and she said, "Can I come with you?" So I went, "Okay." So she came, and me and Sid actually put together our programme and we funded it, but we didn't think, we didn't think they'd look at it. We're not a social care provider at all, we're just a family. Anyway, the woman looked at it. This is the woman from the 4 boroughs, and she said, "Oh, it's not half bad." She said, "I thought it'd be rubbish, but it's really quite good." And then she turned to the other woman, the manager of social care, and she said, "I think you should fund this." So basically, we got the biggest, what's called direct payment in the borough to fund a programme for Jono that's ever happened in Newham. And we've been running Jono's programme ever since, and that was the start of what is now this thing called Hopeful Futures. So, rush the story along a bit. Jono's behaviour has got hugely better since he's been doing the programme. We're 2 years in, everything's going really well, he's much happier, he's a lot less anxious, he stopped attacking people. I might even bring him to Trinity, it's all going well. Nice, breathe, and then, well, you know what happens then. COVID happens, lockdown happens, and we're terrified because we think we're going to lose it all. So first of all, we have these incredible miracles where the local authority gets in touch with us and offers to help us, which is amazing. That's great. Breathe. But 6 weeks later, Si gets incredibly ill. So you might have heard, I don't know if you knew about this, but my husband at this stage gets incredibly ill. And you know the way they have those conversations with people where they go, preparing for the end of life. So that's the conversation they had with me, because they thought Si had a brain tumour. He rapidly deteriorated. He went from being quite healthy and fit to someone who was in bed for like 23 hours a day, couldn't stop being able to speak, lost some of his bodily stuff, not all of it. This is the middle of COVID. And the only reason he wasn't in hospital was because of COVID, because they were worried about him getting COVID. Anyway, eventually he was diagnosed with having loads of strokes. That was what it was. But I was then having to run this programme for Jono in the middle of lockdown. My husband's really ill. He's in and out of hospital. They can't figure out what's caused all the strokes. They think it's acute leukemia. It's pretty bad. And all the kind of experienced workers that I had working on Jono's programme had all gone home to Shield. So I had my team was made up of 2 autistic women and kids, 18-year-olds. That was it. That's all I had. And so I did a lot of praying. I used to walk Jono up to the centre, because at that stage I was still having to walk him up. We weren't using public transport because of, the health authority had let us do the programme, but we had agreed to not use buses so that we didn't, Jono can't do social distancing. So I'm walking up and praying, and basically a friend of mine says to me, "How are you going to do this, Al? You can't be up and down hospital with Si and trying to run Jono's programme, you just can't do it." And then a girl rings me up from Cornwall, and she says, "Hello, Al." I say, "Hello, Alice." She says, "How would you feel about me coming to London to run Jono's programme?" She's a learning disability nurse, so obviously I'm like, yeah. And I say, "Well, that's fantastic, Alice, that's wonderful, but I haven't got any money to pay you," because we weren't really paying ourselves very much money. So I was thinking, how? So anyway, Si, who doesn't use words at this current moment in his life, manages to sign to me that there is an account, which I didn't know about, that he'd been squirreling away money. It's like a reserve for Hopeful Futures, because he was worried about the local authority not paying us, long story. Anyway, I say to Alice, "I think there's enough money in there to pay you to run Hopeful Futures, but you'd only be able to run it for about 3 months, and then we'd run out of money. But come, because, obviously I'd have to pay a lot more than I was paying myself." So she said, okay. She's a very brave girl. She came from Cornwall to London to run our programme. Little bit of interaction here. Guess when the money ran out? Guess when it ran out? July 2022. Basically, that money lasted until July 2022. That's when I ran it. So she came and has basically transformed what we do. The final bit of the story, the bit I wanted to end on, is what the first thing we did for other people, because bear in mind, up until then, all we were doing really was stuff for Jono. We really prayed about it, And I prayed with I've got this prayer group, the MP's wife, the ones that nearly get arrested, them lot. So I've been praying with them, and I felt as though, we all felt as though, that the first thing we should do was some sort of inclusive worship service for people with autism and learning disabilities. That should be the first thing we did as Hopeful Futures. But we didn't really have a clue about how to do it, and I was like, But Sonia, who's one of the people I pray with, had said to me, you know, I keep getting this thing called wave offering. I don't really understand what that is. And I go, I don't know. It's in numbers somewhere. I don't know what that means. Anyway, Christmas 2020, lockdown, Alice's mum and dad in Cornwall are watching Songs of Praise. On Songs of Praise, there's a group called Wave. And they run an inclusive worship service for people with learning disabilities. They've been doing it for 12 years in North London. Alice, being Alice, gets in touch with them. Long story short, we've been running Wave, Little Ilford, Manor Park, East London, for the last year. It's the most fun you can have with cake I've ever had. It feels fantastic. It's a very... Muswell Hill, to be fair, the North London guys put this together. They figured it out over 12 years. It's a very simple, predictable service with lots of caveats. So people who maybe would struggle with the service, we've got a pop-up tent. Can't speak highly enough of pop-up tents. Great for people who are struggling. So if you want to really support your autistic kids, just buy a pop-up tent, fill it with sensory toys, perfect little sensory room, works a treat. Pop-up tent, duvet, so they can put a duvet on their heads, that always helps, and lots of things that they can hold on to. So we have a pop-up tent, we have an art table where people can do stickers if they get bored, and then we have the service, which is really predictable, and one of the signs, and a very, very short talk, mostly interactive, not like me today, more like 5 minutes, and lots of cake, and that's it. And we've been doing that every month for a year, and basically we get about 30 people, and it's great. We've got families coming from 6 different churches locally, and I can tell you more if you want to talk to me about it afterwards. So that is the thing that we've done. But what we've now done, which is amazing, is that Jono, who 7 years ago was basically attacking people every 10 minutes, has gone from that to, and a person, if you gave him art, he would just do brown and black, because he was just so deeply unhappy. They're now working on his programme, and he's doing art, and we're actually at the point of selling it on our website, so I brought some with me. So I've done all these different cards. My mother, we've got this. We haven't. These aren't for sale. These are just things that we're trying out. So please let me know what you think, because we're trying them out at the moment to see what might sell on our website. And I think the thing for me, okay, is that everybody has a gift that God gives them. It's really important that autistic people get a chance to show that gift to the world. Final bit I wanted to say, just to finish. 2014, Caris has this real thing that she feels from God about doing this art school. We all go, there, Caris, that's very nice. A month ago, she starts her art school. So that's the end of the story, and that's me done. Sorry, Janice, I'll take you over now.
Has anybody got any questions, or do you want to leave it till later, whatever?
Is Simon any better?
Si, yeah, he's pretty good now. He can actually do quite a lot of talking. Sadly.
Takes after his mother.
Does he get a word in?
Yeah, can he get a word in? It's tricky. No, he's doing pretty well. He's not yet working, but he does most of Johnny's care now. That's why I can be here, really, because he's doing most of Johnny's care. Any other questions, sorry? Yeah?
My great-grandson has autism,
Yeah.
non-verbal,
Yeah.
but she can't, his mum can't get a diagnosis yet.
Yeah.
He's been put in mainstream school,
Yeah.
but he's attacking the teacher.
Yeah. He will. Right. So what can you do?
She
That
just
wa-
wants a diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems at the moment is that there's this waiting list on diagnoses. So what she can do, there's a couple of things. Is there an SEN partnership anywhere near where she lives? Because they're normally quite good and they can support her. But the key thing she can do is collect evidence.
Yeah.
So what she needs to do as much as possible, is what I always say to parents, is collect evidence, paperwork trail. She needs to get the local CAMS involved if he's attacking teachers, particularly because it's actually not safe for him to be there. She needs to, but also just write down what's happening. And
Like
make,
you said, there's one word you can say, sorry.
yeah, I know.
That's
So
all.
when Jono attacks people now, Jono does say sorry afterwards, because he doesn't really understand what he's doing at the time, but afterwards he gets incredibly upset about it, and lots of autistic people do. And for them, the attacking people is a terrible thing. It's just that in the moment they can't stop that thing happening. That's one thing I'd really like to ban around autistic children, by the way. There's two words I'd really like to ban. One is naughty, the other is aggressive. Okay, they're neither. They're just trying to get by in a world that is actually quite hostile to them. So I would just say, get her to collect as much evidence as she can and try and get her to reach out to other parents. But if she's getting nowhere, then I would say take it higher within the local educational authority.
If you've got any questions, Alison's not going to do a runner, so
Not yet.
you can